water for me, just in case. Okay, I just want to make sure I wasn't drinking somebody else's water. Good morning. One of the things that I have always enjoyed about Kevin's sermons is the way he starts with a joke. I like dad jokes. Kevin's jokes are usually dad jokes. But I don't want to steal Kevin's thunder, so I do a little different thing. Most of you know that I'm a pediatrician, so I have an affinity for kids. And I stumbled across a listing of quotes, words of wisdom from kids that I want to share with you. Patrick, age 10, says, "Never trust a dog to watch your food." Michael, who's 14, says, "When your dad is mad and asks you, 'Do I look stupid?' Don't ask him. Don't answer him. And also, don't tell your mom her diet's not working." Susie, age 9, says, "Never hold a dustbuster and a cat at the same time." Naomi, age 15, says, "If you want a kitten, start out by asking for a horse." Amy, do you recognize that strategy, Amy? That's a strategy I use with Amy sometimes. Lauren, age 9, says, "Felt markers are not good to use as lipstick." Joel, age 10, says, "Don't pick on your sister when she's holding a baseball bat." And Eileen, age 8, says, "Never try to baptize a cat." Seems like good words of wisdom. When I agreed to speak during one of the Sundays of Kevin's sabbatical, I asked him, "Well, do you have themes in mind? What should I talk about?" And he said, "You can talk about anything you want." I said, "Wow, that's power." I'm not sure I'm up to that. I had some ideas, and then I saw a portrayal of God on television, and I started to think about how we visualize God and how that impacts our understanding of God. And you may have picked up in the hymns that we sang and the one that we'll sing later, the common theme in all of them is that they all include images of God. And so that was kind of the idea behind picking those hymns. So I want to talk a little bit about our image of God, how we imagine God. I'll probably raise more questions than give answers. My goal is just to get us thinking about how we visualize God and how that maybe impacts how we understand God. Some of my observations might be a little irreverent, so if I'll ask for forgiveness ahead of time if I offend anybody. I want you to all close your eyes, and in your mind's eye, picture God. Think of your image of God. Okay, open your eyes. I won't ask you what your image was, but my bet is for a lot of us it's something like this. It's an old white man sitting in the clouds. He apparently has a fear of barbers or razors because he's always got long hair and he's always got a big bushy beard. He usually, does this have a laser? Yeah. He usually has a halo. And sometimes there's light emanating from him. Now maybe your picture included God on a throne, still in the clouds, still with the long white hair and just not quite as bushy, still with the beard a little better kept. I wonder why God always wears a robe rather than pants or a shirt. And the sandals. Why does God wear sandals? God's often depicted with sandals. Why not some high-performance Nikes or something? And why the throne? That looks really uncomfortable. But that's often an image that we have. Michelangelo, in his painting Creation of Adam on the roof of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, imagined a similar God. Again, still kind of an old white guy, bushier hair, big beard. This time he's barefoot. At least he's not wearing sandals. I started wondering, I wonder what, AI is all the rage right now. And AI works, you probably know that AI works by scouring the internet for text and for images and then kind of compares them and compiles them. And so I thought, all right, there's a lot of information on the internet. If anybody knows what the internet looks like or what God looks like, maybe the internet does. So these are the images that the AI came up with. I suspect the AI is influenced a little bit by images of Jesus because these look like younger people than on the previous images. But still, same theme, white guy, long hair, beard, robe, all the important things. This is sort of God imaged as a Jedi Knight, I think. I'm not sure. It does look like Obi-Wan Kenobi. Yeah. So for many of us, this old white man image is our go-to image of God. And I admit that if somebody asked me to picture God, that's kind of what pops into my head too. I think it's a cultural thing. I think we've seen some version of that image so many times that it's kind of burned into our head. As I already mentioned, I wonder about the robes and the sandals and long hair. And I think that's probably just a reflection of how we imagine ancient men looked. That they all wore robes. Adam, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Moses, Elijah, think of it. They are all wearing robes. Just as an aside, I think that, those people are all like thousands of years apart. Did the fashion ever change? I'm told when I wear pants that are 10 years old that they're not good. So for things to be in fashion for thousands of years, maybe that's okay. We tend to imagine God in human form. That's what's comfortable for us. And even though the Bible most commonly refers to God using male terms, we know that God is spirit. God exists separate from gender. God is neither female. I use the he pronoun. I'm trying to avoid that. God's neither male or female. We know that we're all created in God's image. And so God must have features that are commonly associated with both men and women. And we'd agree that God exists separate from race. God's no more white than he is black or Asian or any other race. We recognize that God is not limited to a physical body or even a place or time. We say God exists everywhere, and I see images from the Webb telescope or the Hubble telescope of galaxies hundreds of billions of light years away, and I think, wow, how far can it be for light to have to travel 100 billion years before it gets to us? And yet we believe that God is there. And so God exists sort of separate from space and separate from time. And we don't have the capacity to imagine that. We don't know how to imagine that. And so we tend to imagine God in these specific human forms. So I started to wonder if I could find is there some other examples of God not in a human form? Some of you know that Amy and I were fortunate enough to recently take a trip to Europe. And you can't go to Europe without visiting at least a couple of cathedrals. And I thought, so anticipating this, I thought, maybe I'll come across some images of God in the cathedral that sort of capture this a little bit. In Dresden, Germany, Amy and I went into a cathedral, and I should say before I say that, we went in several cathedrals, and I couldn't find another image of God other than the old white man. And I was getting a little frustrated. And then I kept telling Amy, we got to go in there so I can look for an image of God. But in a cathedral in Dresden called Frauenkirche, this is the altar. And when you get up a little close up, this is the image of God. Still in the clouds, surrounded by angels, but this eye in the triangle. Anybody? There's a name for this image. Anybody know what it is? The eye in the triangle. So it's called the Eye of Providence. You may remember it. You may recognize it being on the back of your $1 bill. And I don't know why. I don't know the history there. But the idea behind the Eye of Providence is that God is there. God is all-seeing. God's always looking. It's a reminder that God is always present. To me, it doesn't have a physical body. I'm not sure I like this idea because it sort of tells me that God's watching and recording and not interacting. But that said, it's at least sort of another image of God that's not a human, not sort of a person. I was surprised that I didn't find more images of God. I started thinking about how our modern culture depicts God. So I started thinking, okay, well, what movies has God had a starring role in? So we're going to watch a couple of brief movie clips. The first is the OG God movie from 1956.
I am here.
Put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground.
So, those of you who are older than 35 recognize this as the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments used to be on every year around Easter. Is it still? You can stream it all the time, I guess. But yeah. I haven't seen the Ten Commandments in forever, but the big lesson here is that God speaks in Elizabethan English. So that's my image of God. This is a clip from a movie from 1977.
What if it were you? What if you were given a chance,
Jerry,
to meet and speak
up here.
with God?
Let's go for a ride.
What would it take to convince you it wasn't a joke?
Change the weather.
Little rain?
Yeah, a small shower.
One small shower, you got it.
It's not raining outside. It's just in here. This is fantastic.
Anybody remember what the movie that was? It's called Oh God. And God, here, God's still an old white guy, but this time he wears really thick glasses and has kind of a raspy smoker's voice. Again, kind of those over 35 will recognize that God is portrayed by George Burns, who had a cigar in his mouth, I think, right up until the day he died at 100 years old in 1996. A cigar-smoking old man with poor vision might feel like an odd choice to represent God, but it does make him seem a little approachable. And a sense of humor, right? I mean, a rainstorm inside your car is pretty creative. This one is from a little more recent. This is from 2000.
Until he met someone with a plan of his own.
Who are you?
I'm God.
Flood's coming, and I want you, Evan Baxter, to build an ark.
Anybody know that one? Evan Almighty, which was filmed in Crozet and a couple shots in Waynesboro. And So this time God's an African American man, still older, still with a beard, but this time a lot more clean cut. We're sometimes uncomfortable talking about race, but I don't think prior to this movie I had seen God portrayed as a person of color. And so that was sort of an interesting thing to me. And maybe that's a positive. I mean, I think that was a good start at changing our images of God. A movie that struck me because of its really different presentation of God was The Shack. It came out in 2017, and it was a book that came out 10 years earlier. In this movie, God shows up as an African-American woman, and she's accompanied by a young Middle Eastern man who is to represent Jesus, and a kind of wispy Asian woman who is the Holy Spirit.
Got a fire going inside if you want to warm up.
Mackenzie Allen Phillips. I've been looking forward to this.
Do I know you?
Not very well, but we can work on that.
So that to me was, The Shack was sort of a really, was an intriguing story. I remember being just sort of struck that I'd never seen God portrayed as an African American woman. I also remember reading commentaries that this was blasphemous, and so for some people it was a difficult thing to think of God in terms of a woman or even a black woman, and it just was very unsettling for them. After thinking a little bit about our cultural images of God, I started thinking about ways that God showed himself in the Bible. I'm not an expert, but I think most of the images of what we think of as God the Father come from the Old Testament. The New Testament, lots about Jesus, and references to God, but not so many sort of physical manifestations of God outside of some really bizarre descriptions and revelations. There's a couple that I came up with. In Genesis, we're told that God walks through the Garden of Eden in the cool of the day. The scripture that Paxton read this morning was about God wrestling Jacob and dislocating Jacob's hip. It's sort of an interesting thing to me that God is a cheater. Like, I can't beat you, so I'm gonna dislocate your hip. In Exodus 3, we saw on the Ten Commandments movie, God shows himself as a burning bush. In Exodus 13, the other scripture that Hadley read, God leads the Israelites in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. In Exodus 33, there's an interesting story of how Moses asks God to let him see him, and God says, well, you can't see my face or you'll die, but I'll rig it up so that you can see my back as I turn the corner. And so God allows Moses to see his back. In Daniel in the lion's den Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are thrown into a blazing furnace, and a fourth person shows up. In 1 Kings, God reveals himself to Elijah as a gentle whisper, but as you read the story, it's only after there's some devastating winds and strong earthquake and big fire, all of which you might have thought was God, but no. It was the gentle whisper. And then in Matthew, one sort of New Testament reference, the Spirit of God descends on Jesus as a dove. Most of the references to God in the Bible are in a masculine form. There are lots of times where we refer to God as the Father. But as I mentioned early on, we believe God is spirit. God's separate from gender. and God's nature includes qualities that we think of as feminine just as much as those that we think of as masculine. Some would say that our overwhelming references to God as a man are maybe a reflection of the patriarchal culture that the Bible was written in. But even there, even in the patriarchal, that's a hard word to say, patriarchal society, there's lots of biblical references that reflect a more feminine version of God. In Genesis, as I've already mentioned, God created man in his image, male and female, he created them. And so we think God has features of females and males both. In Isaiah 66, we're told that God comforts his people like a mother comforts her child. In Isaiah 49, there's a phrase that like a woman would never forget her nursing child, God will not forget his children. In Deuteronomy, God is like a mother eagle hovering over her young. In Luke, Jesus tells a parable of God seeking the lost like a housekeeper trying to find her lost coin. And Jesus also talks about longing for the people of Jerusalem to gather them up as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. And so we see references to female versions or female aspects of God as well as male in the Bible. But I have to admit, personally, I'm so ingrained to think of God in masculine forms that even still, there are times where it feels a little uncomfortable to refer to God as a woman. But I think it's important that we do so. It's part of the reason I asked Glenn to lead was it the last hymn we sang, 74? I looked at that one and I was kind of struck. It's a familiar hymn that we're accustomed to singing, but the original version has all male references, and it substitutes some female references. And I think for some of us, singing it with female references sort of feels a little awkward, a little foreign. We're not opposed to it, but it's like, yeah, that's not the way it was supposed to be. But I think that awkwardness and sort of being intentional about doing that gives us a practice of helping to understand God better. I'm not sure how we change our image of God as a Caucasian person. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how outside of gender, where we can change pronouns that we're using, how we can refer to God differently. But I think it's helpful to find ways to try to prompt ourselves to display God manifesting different forms than what we're used to. We've looked at a number of different images of God: male, female, animal, elements of nature. I think imagining God in different forms helps us to not put constraints on God. One of Kevin's last sermons before his sabbatical was about humans being created in the image of God. I think too often we want to create God in our image. God's more understandable if we think of God in human terms, and I understand that. But when we latch on to a specific image of God, we place restrictions on our ability to understand God's love. I mentioned early on that I had some questions, not a lot of answers. I want to share a couple of them. I won't ask you to answer. Just think about them. And maybe think back to the image of God that you had in your mind when we first started. The first question is, does it feel wrong to think of God in another way? If your image of God was a distinguished old white man, what keeps us from thinking of God as a woman, as someone who is non-white, maybe somebody who's bald or somebody who has curly hair? I wonder why it feels awkward. And maybe for some, maybe it feels heretical, and why is that? I wonder if our cultural image of God as an old white man causes harm to people who've suffered trauma at the hands of old white men. I wonder if our discomfort imagining God in a different way harms those who see their abuser in that image. When we picture God as a person, God's always clean and majestic. His robe is always nicely pressed. But we know that Jesus spent his life, a lot of his time hanging out with the outcasts. And so if we imagine God as a person, I wonder if it's helpful or reasonable to think of God looking like society's outcasts. Can we imagine God looking like a homeless person? Or can we imagine God being tatted up and having some piercings? Can we imagine God as a transgender person? If we think of God in the form of an outcast, I wonder how that affects our interactions with the least of these. And my last question is it okay if our old white male image of God is comforting? Are we missing something by holding on to that image? Again, I don't have answers, but just questions. I suspect that thinking of God in the metaphor of being a human being or an animal or even an element of nature like cloud or fire provides a way for our finite brains to understand God. It's important, though, that we understand that these are really imperfect metaphors. God, I think, is beyond our imagination and beyond our comprehension. But maybe with some humility about our images of God, maybe that will help us not put constraints on who God is. Thanks.